kind of feel?
It started off literally mechanically. We realized that at that point in the arc that every time Cadmus had gone up against the Justice League had cleaned their clock. We said, you know what? If Cadmus is going to be a credible threat, they're going to need to win one.
Bruce Timm. If you guys don't know who Bruce Timm is, I personally refer to him as the king of DC.
I'm the king!
This man understood every character in the DC universe to the point that he created new characters and added them to the canon. And they've grown to become way more popular than even some of the original characters in DC.
Yeah, it's funny because I had been kind of peripherally aware that she'd become really popular. I mean, I always knew she was popular because, yeah, obviously a lot of toys, and I'd go to conventions and there's obviously a lot of, tons of Harley cosplayers and stuff. But I still wasn't quite aware how popular she'd become until somebody a couple years ago, a journalist mentioned that to me, that they said, oh yeah, they're calling her like the fourth pillar of the DC universe. And I'm like, huh, what?
He's one of the co-creators of Harley Quinn, and now everybody knows who she is. She's become so popular to the extent that she now has her own animated series and is a huge and prominent member of the Suicide Squad. Now, speaking of Suicide Squad, I decided to talk about the best Suicide Squad that have been put on screen. No, not this one.
What, we some kind of Suicide Squad?
This one, baby. Yeah, Task Force X. This is the best Suicide Squad team. And in this video, I'm gonna gush over why. Justice League Unlimited. Damn, those were the days when it felt good to be a DC fan. This animated series was created by Bruce Timm, and it has so many good and memorable episodes. Great episodes like the epilogue episode and the Destroyer episodes were created in this series.
What we have here is a rare opportunity for me to cut loose and show you just how powerful I really am.
Out in the air.
But I'm not going to talk about those episodes today. The episode I'm talking about today is the Suicide Squad episode called Task Force X. And that episode was written by the legend Dwayne McDuffie. Dwayne McDuffie is the man responsible for ultimate goals like Justice League Doom, Ben 10 Alien Force, and Static Shock. And he also made the best Suicide Squad.
When we switched to the point of view of the villains, it not only worked really well for the show, but it worked really well for the arc. It was a sort of a situation where we're in these characters' heads. They're going to space, to the scariest place in the world, and gods walk around in there. And they just have to go in there and steal their stuff and get out. And anybody in there is so powerful that they could kill all of them.
Yeah.
This episode had a bunch of villains going to the Justice League headquarters to steal a weapon for war known as the Annihilator. Yes, the Justice League headquarters.
Always did want to die for my country.
The characters for the team and in this episode include the best adaptation of Rick Flag.
What if I don't want to go with them?
Then you can go and take your seat, tough guy.
Deadshot, Captain Boomerang, Plastique, and the very, very much underrated and unappreciated Clock King.
Unlike Heaven, this tower has a duty schedule, one I've studied thoroughly. I've scheduled your visit for when they're at their weakest.
These characters were specifically chosen for this episode, some to drop a few references here and there, but mainly everyone had a reason to be here. There's a particular scene that I love where the members of the team are carefully crafting out a plan on how they are going to sneak in without any trouble. How they will get in and get out safely without the league noticing, because they knew exactly where they were going. This brought an opportunity for some really fun dialogues.
Last minute change in the duty roster. Superman's got the drop on you. What do you do?
Before or after I change my shorts.
But he also showed how these characters were going to operate individually and how they were going to find a way to work together. You get to see how they hide their weapons, because like I said, they were doing this undercover, in secret. And all of it just led to some pretty intense and funny moments of the episode.
Excuse me, Mr. Lamb.
When you needed someone for a distraction, Plastic and Deadshot were the guys. When you needed someone to say when and where they should move in and get out, then Clock King was your guy. Everybody here had a reason to be here. Every character had a reason for being in this episode. And from what I've been hearing about the new Suicide Squad movie, that's the same thing that is happening. Now, one thing I really loved in this episode were the heroes the villains went up against. The heroes we got in this episode were C-list type heroes. This episode brought heroes like Vigilante, Shining Knight and Atom Smasher for the villains to go up against, and I absolutely love it because it gave characters that needed some recognition the recognition they deserved.
Bruce came up with the idea. He says, we're going to have all these heroes and they're all going to be on a team and they're going to break up and go on missions. And I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, it sounds pretty cool.
They could have had all the villains go up against heroes like Green Lantern or Captain Atom until John arrived. But instead, they had them go up against these cool heroes that nobody knew of. And thanks to this, we're able to see some really cool, hard-hitting action scenes. Now, for those that have watched the episode, this episode taught us one thing. Don't mess with John Jones.
So, what do we do with him now? I'd like to go in there and wipe clean the last 2 years of his memory.
What did he say?
Overall, to me, this episode really captivated the magic behind the Suicide Squad. You find yourself basically rooting for the villains from the beginning to the end of the episode. In the end, the villains succeeded and they ended up breaking the Justice League, but not without the huge risk and sacrifice they had to make. And yes, Amanda Waller was behind it the whole time. Because, I mean, why not? It's Amanda Waller.
No loose ends.
To me, this is the best Suicide Squad. Not because they had cool characters or cool villains, but because in under 22 minutes they were able to tell a good Suicide Squad story. A story where every character was really important. And we saw things from the side of the villains. Villains that you find yourself constantly rooting for.
It's that whole genre where, you know, you have a group of misfits, they have a job to do, and the first half of the movie is the plotting of it, the planning, and that can be interesting, and then the second half is, you know, them executing the plot, and then it goes wrong. And we realized as we were plotting it, you know what, we really need to show this episode completely from the point of view of the bad guys. So, you know, they have to be, you know, oh my God, you know, we're up here in the watchtower.
Like I said in my last video, the cast for the new Suicide Squad looks really good. And from what I've been seeing on Instagram posts and the news that I've been hearing based on this movie, it seems James Gunn was given full freedom to do whatever he wanted to do in this movie. DC basically gave James Gunn full creativity for this movie. He had a whole bunch of DC characters that he could have used for his movie, but he specifically chose these few characters for a reason.
But I also like to continuously take in new supervillains, other supervillains who have sometimes been in the Suicide Squad comics over the years, but also a lot of you know characters like Polka Dot Man and Ratcatcher who have never been in the Suicide Squad, but who I just think are great DC villains who have something to offer and that we could have put into the movie.
I just hope he captures what makes the Suicide Squad work so well in the comics and bring it to the big screen, because this episode did it, and they did it in under 22 minutes. One personal thing that I really loved about this episode is that it was these guys who came up with the name Task Force X for the team, because they weren't allowed to use Suicide Squad in a kids show, and now that name has become a permanent mainstay for the team.
It's the government's official code name for the Suicide Squad.
There's extremely.
Task Force X.
Task Force X.
If you don't call them Suicide Squad, you call them Task Force X. Nonetheless, this episode was a full blast to revisit. It's thoroughly engaging, it had great fight scenes, an incredible voice cast, and it was just a fun Suicide Squad episode to watch the whole way through. If you haven't seen this episode, go see it. In fact, if you haven't seen the animated series, go see it. But if you have seen the animated series, let me know your thoughts based on this episode down in the comments below. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.